Hello everyone, buongiorno tutti. Welcome to lesson 9 in week 10 of Sustainability in Society. So this week we're going to go over natural resource management. So I've been in this sustainability field for quite a while now, and it used to be, and it still is, common when people ask me, what do you study, what do you teach, and when I say sustainability, a lot of times they'll say, oh yeah, so like recycling, and I have to chuckle because yes, but, and there's a really big but. So certainly recycling is part of it, but as you see, of course, as you understand now, like sustainability is this huge field way beyond recycling. It has to do with all the the economy and equity and all these other things that we've talked about. But just in terms of natural resource management, people tend to kind of think like, hey, I recycle and that's good enough, right? So we can recycle our way out of these waste management problems. And while recycling is part of the solution, it is not the solution. It is not the solution. And that's one of the things that you'll learn a little bit about this week. But as you go through this content, when we go through natural resource management, I want you to think, first of all, for sort of first principle of this whole thing, the best way to minimize our waste is to not use that resource in the first place. Okay, so I'll repeat that. The best way to minimize our waste is to not use that resource in the first place. So, yes, recycling is good. It's better than not recycling, for sure. But the better solution is actually to just not create the waste in the first place. So that should be our primary goal, to try to reduce resource use, period, right? So use less, buy less, etc. If you are going to, we need to do things. We need to, use physical materials to survive, right, in our daily lives. And so, if you are going to use something, you should find a way to recycle it. But actually, it's even better than recycling is just reusing that thing, right? And I'll give you a quick example of that, right? So I'm drinking my coffee this morning, right? So I have my coffee cup. So this, this is made of ceramic, which is, I actually don't even know what ceramic is. But it's, I guess, limestone and some other things. So it's made from, things that occur naturally, rocks in this case. There might be a little bit of plastic in there, I don't know. And so if I'm going to drink my coffee, like, I need my coffee, all right? So it's not an option. It needs to happen. And so if I'm going to drink coffee, I need a cup to drink it in, obviously. And so instead of using a paper cup that I can recycle, if I use one of these and I just keep reusing it and reusing it and reusing it, this thing will last, my whole life if I'm careful. That's better than doing something that needs to be recycled. Now, the best way to avoid the resource use is just to not drink coffee and not require the mug at all. But, we have to live and we have things that we want to do, so it's okay. Nothing wrong with drinking coffee and living your life, doing your thing. But if you do that, the best option in terms of managing your waste is just to reuse that item as it is. Of course you have to clean it out or whatever, but instead of, constantly, you think if I get a paper mug that I can recycle, or even a styrofoam is recyclable, it takes resources to recycle that. It takes energy, there's a physical infrastructure to transport that item to the recycling center, and then it's got to go through a manufacturing facility and then a shipping. So there's like all these other things that need to happen for that to be recycled and be converted into a usable good. And so the better thing to do is just like reuse it as is to the extent possible. And so, like everything else in sustainability, when it comes to natural resource management and waste management, it's complicated, right? So it's not just as easy as throwing things in a recycling bin. And so that's some things that I want you to think about this week. The other thing that I really want you to think about is like an overall framework for natural resource use. Again, we need to use things. So I'm looking around me. I have a whole bunch of things, right? So I have a computer, I have glasses, I have a table, all this stuff all around me. And so if we are going to use resources, what we want to do instead of the current system, which is really we extract, we use it, and then we throw it out. That's kind of the traditional way. It's called linear resource use. Extract, use, dispose, right? So it's linear. That's it, and then we start again, and we extract more, use, dispose, right? And so that's on and on and on, right? Like all these resources. And so what we need to do, what we need to consider is we need to use things, right? So we have to extract it at some point. So we extract it, then we use it. So what we try to do is go back, right? So we loop that back instead of disposing of it. We take that resource and we find a way to reintegrate it back into that system so we can take the place of that extraction, right? So instead of pulling natural resources from the environment, when we use something, we try to just kind of find some way to loop it back into that cycle to sort of avoid having to extract more natural resources. And that is often referred to as circular resource use, right? So circular resource use, we just keep using on and on and on to the extent possible. Of course, we want to use renewable energy the whole time, right? So the future has to be circular. I'll just put it that way. The future has to be circular because we are seeing some evidence of resource scarcity, not so much in the United States, but certainly in many other places in the world. There's some resource scarcity. And we have to recognize that we live in a finite planet and there's limits to these resources. And so and also there's all kinds of implications for that disposal. There's issues with landfill space, there's issues with pollution from things like electronics, there's issues with climate change, greenhouse gases from organic things that are thrown in the trash. So if you throw organic waste in a landfill, it's going to convert to methane. And as you should know from an earlier lesson, methane is much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And so it's better to sort of compost or find a way to reuse that organic waste as well. So the point is we need to close that loop and use circular resource use. So that's one of the main frameworks for this lesson is circular resource use. And you're going to hear that if you're in the sustainability space or you're paying attention, you're going to hear that term a lot, like circular resource use, circular economy, that sort of thing. So we have to start thinking in these closed loops instead of this linear model that's traditionally used. Okay, so that's kind of an overall framework for this week. In terms of the content itself, we go over the 3 R's: the reduce, reuse, recycle. So the kind of stuff that I just talked about, that reduce, reuse, recycle is really a hierarchy, right? So reduce is our top priority, then reuse, then recycle. Then there's a short reading about zero waste. So there is this concept called zero waste, which is just circular resource use. And there are some municipalities and even countries that are working towards zero waste or have goals for zero waste. Some of them local. And then again, we have to buy things. We have to use products to live our lives. And so if you're going to buy something, it's helpful to know if your product is, sort of more sustainable or not. And so there's two examples here. There's more that we could go over. But two of the most prominent are Forest Stewardship Council. So if you need to buy a wood product, anything wood or paper, lumber at the local hardware store, whatever, and you're like, well, I want to buy something that's as sustainable as possible, you can look for this Forest Stewardship Council logo. Right, so here's the logo here. So it makes it easy, right? So we don't have time to do all this research all the time. Like, what's the best company and how do they do? How do they manufacture their products, et cetera, et cetera. So in order to sort of make it easy for consumers, you can create these what are called third-party certifiers. And so these are independent organizations. They're not they're not beholden to the corporation, the companies that produce the products. They're not beholden to the government. They're independent. And their goal is just to certify sustainable products. And so Forest Stewardship Council is a really prominent one. It's been around for decades now. Pretty well regarded and well recognized. And you'll learn some details about what FSC does. But if you're ever shopping for a product, a wood product, look for this FSC logo, and at least it was raised in a relatively sustainable manner. It's not perfect, but it's better than just like regular products, which you don't know where they're coming from, if they're they're cutting down native forests or they're illegally logging. All that is avoided by shopping this logo. And then Marine Stewardship Council is similar. You look for the MSC logo. I don't have a picture of it here, but you see a little stamp that says Marine Stewardship. Now there's other, especially for seafood, there's other sustainable seafood certifications, so there's other things you can do research on. But anyway, again, if you buy seafood, you want to look for one of these sustainable seafood logos. And then we just go over some of the details here. And then the last aspect, we'll go over something called Cradle to Cradle certification. Now it's a really interesting, again, this is a third-party certifier. And what they do is their goal is to do cradle to cradle product manufacturing. And so what that means is, if you think of cradle to grave, right? So cradle to grave is that linear resource model, whereas cradle to cradle is to go back, instead of it's circular resource use. And you see it's even goes beyond that to like using all non-toxic materials, and like you have to make sure that every single little chemical that you use in any product that you make is non-toxic. I mean, it's a really robust certification. And again, there are cradle to cradle certified products. There's some actually that are pretty accessible, some not as much, but it's a really robust certification. And just some details about their cradle to cradle certification here. And then we end with the circular economy model. This is a huge topic, but I wanted to put this on your radar. The circular economy is exactly what I've discussed here, and that is we have an economy that we need to use money, right? We live in a world that's dominated by the economy, so if we're going to have an economy that's so important, we should make it as circular as possible. So it's really circular resource use, using all renewable energy and using non-toxic products. And so this has become a pretty big movement in the economic field, and a lot of folks are working on this model because we need to change how we do economics. Hopefully you've gathered that from some of the other content, especially the sustainable growth session or lesson. And so what's the solution to that? It's a circular economy. And so this introduces that topic to you. But if this is something you're interested in, I can point you to more resources. I mean, this is a huge field. And not too long ago, it was like this little niche thing that no one was like really paying attention to it. Now it's kind of moved closer and closer to mainstream, which is great. So we'll end with that. And then of course your weekly questions. And then I also want to remind you to make sure you sign up for your presentation during our next face-to-face meeting, which is I think April 10th. It's on the homepage here. But you just sign up for a topic, and if you really want to write a paper instead of do a presentation, that's fine. I'd strongly prefer you do a presentation, but you're going to do it on either Italian food and culture or Italian history. And I gave you some options here. If you click on this page, all right, it takes you out to sign up. Okay, so you can sign up for a topic here. So make sure you do that. It's not technically due until April 2nd, but you want to get thinking about that and maybe start doing some preliminary research. Okay, so another great week of sustainability content. This is something that's very relevant. People deal with all the time. I mean, we're constantly generating waste. So what do we do with that waste? And more importantly, how do we make a systemic change so that waste either isn't made in the first place, or it's made to be ready to sort of reuse, recycle, etc. And so a lot of this falls into the producers of these goods. They have to rethink how they are designing, manufacturing, producing the products that we use every day. to make it easier for us as consumers to minimize the impacts of the waste. Okay, so that's a good synopsis of this week's lesson. Again, if you have any questions, send me an email. Hope you have a great week.